So we have two small little things to talk about today: compassion and generosity. How many have been the recipient of someone else who gave you compassion or who was generous to you in one way or another?
Sure.
How many have basically depended on that in your life at some point or another? I'm writing a newsletter right now for Justice for Our Neighbors, JFUN. And I'm writing about a moment that happened a little over 40 years ago. I was 19 years old, and I got on a plane and flew far away from my from everything I knew, and ended up in Buenos Aires International Airport in Argentina. There were five of us that were there together, and we'd been studying Spanish. We knew something of the culture. We'd learned how to somehow fit in some ways or another. We thought we could talk Castellano, which was the language of Argentina, until we got at the airport, and the man who was supposed to meet us there at the airport, the man who was supposed to get us from the airport to where we were going to stay that night, the man who was supposed to get us food, the guy who was supposed to negotiate the streets for us, never showed up. There I was in the middle of nowhere, my nowhere. There were people all around, but none of it was familiar to me. And somehow someone with generosity of spirit, and I believe great compassion in their heart, figured out how to look at these five scared 19-year-olds and find us a way to get to where we were going and alleviate that which was in front of us, that which was overwhelming to us in that moment. Tell me how you felt compassion from somebody. Where was it that you experienced somebody caring for you when maybe they didn't have any reason to, but they did anyway? Go ahead, Garnet.
Well, a number of years ago, when I was going through some really rough times in my marriage, my best friend basically took me under her wing and gave me a safe place to be while I figured out what I wanted and needed to do. And what was wonderful is X number of years after that, I was able to return the exact same favor to her. So she taught me well.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Joe.
Well, mine is more recent and more obvious, but you know, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, it was a year ago, and I have just been overwhelmed by all of the people who reached out in some way. And I would often say to Jim, I don't know who this is. I don't know who this is. Here's a card from someone. Who is that? Just people I didn't even know who would send me a little tube of aloe vera cream. You know, this might help when you're having radiation, to, yeah, it's going to make me cry. People who brought a jar of soup that they had made, or, I mean, it goes on forever. How many people reached out? And they were little things. And I would have been okay without it, but it really carried me through.
Thank you, Joe. Where have you felt compassion?
I remember breaking down in the car and somebody coming by, you know, almost immediately to give me a jump.
Nice. Thank you. One of
And
our,
when you,
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, when he said that, an old memory popped to my head. I was
I have that same
probably,
memory.
you do not.
I
You don't
do.
even know
No,
about
I was just about to say that. Go ahead. Tell Sue's story.
But what are you going to say?
You're going to tell Sue's story.
Nope.
No? Okay.
No. See, don't know it. Anyway, I was probably 17 or so, driving my car home, from wherever, and I hit a dog, and it just ran out in front of me, but it somehow had gotten stuck under my car. It was like wrapped up with a muffler or something. And I was so terrorized, I couldn't get out of the car. I didn't want to see a dog that I had hit. I didn't want it to be hurt. I was just hysterical in my car. And some guy, I don't even remember now if he was riding a bike, but he stopped and he helped me and got me out of the car. We called to get some help for the animal. But I don't know what I would have done had he not had the compassion to stop and just help me, because I was hysterical about it, and I've never forgotten it. And that was only like 10 years ago, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, when you were
Maybe
17.
longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe longer. So what's Sue's story?
So my friend Sue was traveling on the west side of Phoenix back when it was less populated over there, out really in the middle of nowhere. And all of a sudden she had a flat tire, and the only thing nearby was a little storage unit space. So she went in there and said, "Can I borrow your phone? This is what happened to me." And the lady there reached into her pocket and she said, "Here, use my card until you sorry, just use my card and bring it back at the end of the day. Just go take care of the business you have."
Total stranger, right?
Total stranger. The word compassion is made up of the word COM. Okay? Passion means suffering. COM is with those that are suffering, with someone who's in a place that's difficult or challenging or whatever it is. But the part of that whole word that I love the best is the calm part, the with. It's the same word that's in community, right? And it's about choosing to see something in that other person that you choose to stand beside. And we erect barriers so easily, don't we? And we find ways to say, that person's not me. That person is different and alien in some way or another. And compassion says, nope, I'm with you in some way or another. Back when you were a kid, how many are pretty sure you wouldn't have survived part of your childhood if someone had not had compassion on you and somehow chose to walk that path with you, whatever it happened to be? And maybe, probably, if you're like me, probably in a way that you didn't deserve, because you were probably in that spot because of something that you'd done wrong, right? And yet someone chose to be there. How do we develop compassion? How do we get that into our hearts? Joe?
I think we have to be able to put ourselves in someone else's situation.
Yeah. It helps. Like, I guess, I don't know this for sure, but I would not be surprised if, for example, our friend Sue, the person at the storage unit place, had at some point or other had a flat tire. and needed someone to be there for them. And so when that happened to Sue, that person was able to say, I've been there, I'll be there for you. So if we can put the other person in that place with us, it helps a lot. Sometimes we don't have exactly the experience, but we're able to say, I have something that approximates that. And I can see the pain, so I choose to step towards you in that moment. What else? In the, go ahead.
I was just saying, having it demonstrated by family, friends, but I know I learned a lot of about compassion from my mother, who was given a lot of compassion for a variety of reasons. And I learned by watching her go through some of that. And she taught me a lot about compassion.
In the book, they said it helps when one recognizes our shared humanity. Just that much, I think, is important, because the walls that we build are universally ones that for some reason or another say, you're not quite. You don't deserve quite to be in this space with me. And compassion essentially steps past those walls and say, we are with each other. And that's a recognition of, this is a human being like me. So when someone's in front of you, in that very moment, whether the moment is good or bad, whether it's easy or difficult for you, what helps you to remember your shared humanity? What are some of the things that you've learned to do in that moment? Go ahead, Jade. You're still muted.
I think if the person still has a need, not a want, but a real genuine need, that it just motivates me or it touches me to step up.
Yeah, yeah. Where you can see that whatever is in front of them is bigger than their easy ability to solve. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Nancy. Good to see you.
I had a hard time getting on tonight. I don't know why. Anyway, whatever.
I'm glad you're here.
Thanks. Good to be here. So what are you talking about now?
We're talking about compassion and how to have it, and what is it that helps us to get past whatever reasons why we are separate from each other. I'm especially interested in how do you guys deal right now? We've got so much division in our country, and it's so easy to divide. How do you have compassion for someone who's across the divide from you? And that could be not just in those political divides, but someone who in this moment seems to have a knife raised over you in some way or another. How do you have compassion in that moment for that person? Go ahead.
Well, another family member, my non-biological grandmother, but she was my grandmother from age 5 or 6 on, what she taught me was, no matter what, you can always find something good in a person, no matter how you can always find something good. You might have to dig really deep or look really far, but you can always find something good and focus on that.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes when we're in the midst of things, it is all the other that we see most readily. And not just all the other about the other person, right? And whatever whatever spines they show, right? But also whatever it is that we are facing at the moment. So whatever the challenge is right in front of us that's difficult for us, it is hard for us to get beyond that, to get to a space of compassion. So at least one of the things that they said is this: you do it because it's good for you to help others. Did you recognize that in what they were talking about? They said things like, if we don't do it, we shrivel if there is no other that we help. When I say I will care only for me, when I find only satisfaction and joy in me, I actually have that satisfaction and joy become increasingly elusive. So when I reach out and I care for you, when I have compassion for you, it actually helps heighten my joy and opens the door to my own joy as I help you find yours. One of my favorite lines was this. Let's see if I can find. The same reward centers of the brain seem to light up when we are doing something compassionate as when we think of chocolate. Right? And so there's a biological thing that happens, that a good thing that happens to us when we do this. Just on a selfish level, it's good for us. Right? That we are caring for each other. Go ahead, Joe.
I just was thinking about, there's been lots of times when I kind of begrudgingly agree to go do something. And I always leave being so thankful that I did it. That I got off the couch, that I went to something to help somebody or to, work somewhere. And I always feel the joy afterwards, even when I didn't want to go to begin with. I don't know if you remember, we used to go to like the Walk to Emmaus gatherings, and it was Friday night, and I'd be so tired and I didn't want to go. And 20 minutes after we were there, and I'm singing and dancing, and Jim's like, well, you don't look very tired anymore. And it just was something that, you have to just do it, and you reap the rewards of that, I think.
Part of what you're talking about there, though, Joe, is self-compassion. I'm glad they spent some time doing that, because often in life we have not been taught well to be compassionate towards ourselves, to stop and care for those things that are hurting inside of us, that are needful inside of us, and being in those spaces that allows us to do that helps a lot. And how many sometimes have been a bit too busy to care for yourself? A bit too needed. Right? So the first one you have to have compassion for is you. So how do you need compassion for yourself in this moment? What part of you needs to be cared for?
Well, it's a lot easier now to take a nap after lunch than when I was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't do that. But now, I guess in this quarantine time, the things you're talking about to be compassionate, it's like for Mike. It's Mike and myself. I don't have like all the students to care for. I help with sandwiches for the soup kitchen every week. So that's a form of compassion. And I try to reach out to friends and cards and phone messages and so forth. But it feels like it's being compassionate more for my husband right now than usual times. So we're doing well. We kind of next month we have our 40th year anniversary.
Nice.
I know. So we're trying to be, just around the house doing housework. Is sort of being well, I'll do the dishes, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think sometimes the best type of compassion you have for yourself is to not berate yourself when you're not perfect. Now, there's several of you out there that look perfect, have no flaws at all that I can see at least. But some of us have to deal with the flaws of ourselves, have to deal with what's not quite right. And sometimes if we're so busy beating ourselves up over those flaws, we never give ourselves the companionship of getting past them. It's not that we don't keep working on the flaws, but we don't have to, in the moment, berate ourselves and be dissatisfied with what's not quite perfect yet. Joe's been going through a tough time right now because this school year is a whole different set of rules, right? But how many of the rest of you have a whole different set of rules than any other year you've gone through? And how many have negotiated that perfectly without mistakes, without errors, without problems? And part of what we have to do is give ourselves permission to not be perfect in this moment, don't we? And have compassion for ourselves, because that's going to also open us up to the person next to us that is dealing with the very same thing, that they're not perfect in this moment. And when we can see that, okay, we got through this, we can be with you as you get through this. But when we don't practice compassion, when we try to be more selfish, self-minded, when we close our hearts, then it makes it almost impossible for us to move forward. As we close our hearts to them, it also closes our abilities to move through life well. But as we open our hearts, and at one point they said, the bigger and warmer our heart, the stronger our sense of aliveness and resilience. So especially now when we're in isolation, right? Nancy, you were right in defining that your world is different than what it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to be without compassion. What you have to figure out how is in the midst of being basically two people sitting next to each other, how to be larger than just that as well. And open your heart to what's around. Even when you can't bring them sandwiches, right? You have to open yourself up to them. Someone else was going to say something. So what are you doing today in the midst of your isolation? All that keeps you separate. What are you doing to open your heart to someone else? Can I tell you what one person did? And I'm not fishing for help this way. Somebody said, "Hey, I'm buying you lunch today." And essentially sent me lunch. They didn't need to. And I can buy lunch on my own, right? But what a lightness of heart it gave to me that they did that. Right? Who can use some little gesture like that from you?
I think I've had some contact with parents who are panicked about school and just need some reassurance. I certainly don't have the answers, but just to hear them out, to talk to them, to answer whatever questions I can.
What kind of questions are they asking you?
Well, my niece called today. She just recently moved from North Carolina to Ohio. So she was asking, what are the things that I thought the kids would need because they're, virtual. And she had some verbiage, they were talking about what if a student tested positive or had a fever, or what would happen. And the language was interesting. And she thought it meant they talked about isolation for the kid, but then they talked about quarantine for the family, and isolation for the kid was like 10 days, quarantine was like 14. So it made it sound like they were going to put that kid somewhere away from their family. So she was really worried about that. I've had a couple families reach out who need some tutoring because they're both working essential workers and don't know how to help their kids. They don't want to put them in like the little place that's on campus for kids who have to be someplace. So they're just trying to find maybe someone who can help the family, just things like that. Just questions about Google and just a lot of different things. So.
It seems like every school is different, and like we all are reacting differently. Even the government, everybody's got a different answer. There is no rule book, really.
Yeah.
And
That's not untypical of life itself. It'd be easier for us to have compassion if what it meant was I get to solve your problem. And in most cases, that's not what compassion means. The lady that I told you about right at the beginning who gave her car keys to Sue, she didn't solve Sue's problems. Sue still had to go figure out how to get the tire fixed, had to figure out how to get things solved, but she gave her the means to be able to get to where she could solve it. She gave her some strength to be able to do it. And in the midst of this stuff, like Joni said, the parents have a lot of questions, and Joni doesn't have, I know she looks like she has all the answers, but Joni doesn't have all the answers to fix all their questions, all their concerns, all their worries. But she is a listening ear that allows them to feel not alone in the midst of those problems.
Well, and I think part of that is, when you have relationship, we talked about that before. They're not parents who I'm going to have this year. They're parents who I've had in the past, but because of that relationship that you build over the years, it's nice to know that they might consider you a place that they can talk about what's worrying them, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
Jim, I don't know if you remember when Jim decided to quit his teaching job and start seminary. There was a really quick turnaround for that. So we went from 2 salaries to 1. And I'm always the person who worries about money. Jim's always the person who, is sure everything will work out just fine. But do you remember that there was a couple who, every time we saw them, which was maybe once a month, they would write us a $25 check and say, go out to dinner. And I've never forgotten that. And $25 wasn't a lot, but it was just their way of showing, compassion to us. They knew we were on this journey. And I just thought it was a really sweet way to just very simply reach out and be supportive. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. And there's several people that I remember through that whole time of trying to figure out the movement from teaching to seminary and then into ministry. We wouldn't have gotten through without a whole bunch of people who walked beside us in a lot of different ways. But I think that's true of life, isn't it? So one of your first jobs when it comes to compassion is to be grateful for all those people and remember them. But then the second part is to have an open heart, because this week, somehow you're going to be confronted by somebody who needs something, who needs a listening ear, maybe. You might get somebody on your heart that you just need to call. You may not know why, right? All of that is what will help you develop everything else. And one point that it quoted the Buddha and said, what is the one thing that when you possess it, you have all other virtues? It is compassion. So if we can look at the world and look at each person in that world, we will develop everything we need in all of the stuff we've been talking about. If we can look with compassion at that person and at the next person and the next person. But to do that, I think you have to have what they finished with at the end of the next chapter, which they called generosity of spirit. And it started at the beginning of the chapter and said something like this. Where is it? I'm not finding it, sorry. But generosity is something you can work on specifically to develop, right? How many have been less generous at moments in your life and have had to learn how to increase that? Did I tell you one of the best ways I did that? Have I told you about my car that I used to drive? So this little teeny tiny car, and it had an old cigarette ashtray in it. And when I started driving that car, I had no money at all. I mean, okay, so this is what I would do. Anytime I got change, I would toss my change into that ashtray, because at the end of the month, that was literally all the money I had. Nothing in my wallet besides that change. But as I went further along in life, and I got back on my feet financially, and then I had a little bit more, got a little bit of a raise, I began having that the money began growing in that thing. And so I began using it as I would stop, and there'd be the guy beside the road, right, asking for money. I just reach in, grab some money, and give it to him before I could talk myself out of it. Because how many have talked yourself out of giving money to somebody like that? Right? We've all done it, haven't we? Right? And so this was my way of developing generosity. I just grab and give, so that so it came out of the realm of choice and into the realm of habit. How have you developed generosity? Some people it's easy to be generous with, don't get me wrong. I love being generous with some people, but then there's the others. How do you develop generosity? What's helped you?
So
Go ahead.
Me?
Mhm.
Oh, I think that yeah, it's kind of like what you said. You give a little bit, and then it's kind of like you realize that it doesn't really matter. Everything stays the same. It didn't hurt you, and then it's kind of like it just becomes more okay. You did a little bit more. It didn't affect your life.
Yeah.
In that and then sometimes it becomes like. I had a situation 2 weeks ago on Friday where I walked into Costco in the morning, and they had wipes. And so, like Clorox wipes.
Yeah.
And so I bought 5 pack, And my neighbor had told me the week before that that's like a necessity for her and she can't find them. And so it was okay, two for you. I knew that before I got out of the store. And then where my daughter lives in adult foster care. She's 42. The person who runs the home called me and asked me, do you know where I could get one out of the blue? So two for you. Okay, so then I'm talking to Tom and we're figuring this out and I'm getting my car loaded and I look and there's a brown box of wipes underneath at a cabinet in my garage. And I don't even remember how they got there.
But somehow they were there.
Yeah, and I gave up. It was like, I'm like, that's like a minor miracle that just happened because, it was kind of like, okay, it just seemed odd. And it seemed odd that someone called me on a Friday night and asked me where to get white.
Yeah, yeah. But what you're talking about, Jade, is our tendency, if we're not careful, to think of life in terms of scarcity, which causes us to grasp and hold on to, cling to something that we think we have to protect just for us. And one of the great things I've learned about life is as I uncling, as I let go, I realize that I don't have to. I'm not as dependent on that as what I thought I was. Maybe I'm still remembering how I needed that change in my glove, in my ashtray, but I don't any longer. So I'm trying to cling to it, but maybe I don't have to anymore.
Exactly. And acknowledge the miracles, the minor miracles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we live in a much larger, more generous world than what we sometimes give it credit for. That we have,
go ahead.
that we have a lot more abundance. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to Jade about the wipes. My husband got a whole box of wipes, and I thought, why did you get so many of them? We're never going to get through these 10 things. And anyway, I put them in my car, and I started using them as gifts to people. Like, we had a new next door neighbor that just moved in, and instead of giving her a bottle of wine, I gave her these wipes. It was like I see a girlfriend and I give her this container of wipes, and it's like this gift that everybody can use now.
Yeah.
So it was funny you would mention that. Now I'm down to one container. It's kind of fun giving them out. But the other thing I was going to mention is just listening to people and during this time, and I connect with friends that I usually don't connect with, and just give them a call and say, how are you doing? Or, email or text or whatever. It's like what you said, Jade, it doesn't hurt your life or anything. It adds to it. It enriches your life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because sometimes when you talk about generosity, it's easy to stay just in the material money type of realm, but giving your time and being generous with your time is equally essential. And sometimes that's the same type of invasion where someone calls and you may be in the middle of something and you have to decide, do I pick up the phone now? Do I talk to this person? How much time do I give to them? But if you've gone to one of those conversations, you often walk away going, wow, I'm glad that I could be there.
Mm-hmm.
Who, though, has any kind of dysfunction of ordering your life well so that it's nice and full and you don't have a lot of ease of letting something like that happen? Our scheduling abilities sometimes get in the way of us being generous with our time. but who is there for you at some moment in your life and gave you a minute, an hour, a day, and it changed your life? Yes.
I had someone somehow do something that was a little bit more than that. A couple of years ago, I met a woman who I'd been going through a real rough time with my daughter's health and situation. And I met a woman who, through business, somehow she mentioned she's writing a book, or wrote a book. And when I meet people, and I always have a habit of reading their books. They write. And she wrote a book that had me crying all weekend, because it was almost like the story of her life was the story of my life with my daughter and her health situation. And she published the book and everything, and I guess it didn't sell very well. And we became friends, and she says, well, you know, I wrote that book for you. She goes, I don't know why I was writing that book. I'm so busy and everything. And she still says that.
Wow.
But it made a huge difference in my life. Actually, it's part of how I got back to St. Francis. But it was not, you know, but she self-published this book. And it meant, it was right there when I needed it.
Good. What a great story. Thank you for that. Generosity works very strongly against all of the negative emotions. They spent some time talking about this, how that if, you know, the fear, the greed, the all of those things that sometimes dominate our minds, generosity gives us something that fights against all of that. That gives us a different perspective than what all of those put in our hearts. So in the midst of all this time, that it's really easy to feel the negative emotions, and I'm not sure which ones are hardest for you. What's one way that you can get past them is to figure out ways to be generous. Let me give you an example of that. Nancy, you mentioned earlier that you bring sandwiches up on Saturday mornings. Now, I don't know what it does for you, but in some ways that's the one time every week that I get to see some people, right? And so choosing to be generous and make those sandwiches, and actually it's Joni who makes the sandwiches, I just carry them up there, but I get to see people, right? Mm-hmm. I get to, for a moment, connect with people. And it lightens my spirit, right? And gets me out of that space of fear and despair for a little bit of time. What are you doing that allows you to do the same thing? What's your generosity of spirit that gets you past the whatevers? Go ahead.
I think the thing that nurtures me is being out with the desert and so forth, and being with my plants and watering them, and you know, making sure the birds and the animals have water, and that just feeds my soul.
Thank you for reminding us. It's not just being generous to other people. There's a whole world that needs our generosity as well. So thank you. How about the rest of you? These two pillars, compassion and generosity, I think are absolutely essential to the spiritual life. If we want to have joy, I'm not certain we can have it if we're not going to have compassion for those around us and a generosity of spirit as we approach the world. Because all of that takes us away from whatever pain, struggle, suffering is here and brings us into a larger world that allows us to begin to see that there's something more than just that. The wall that Joni made with her cards from all these people who she wasn't even sure who all of them were, made it so that she saw past whatever was going on in that piece of her body that was damaged. And that wasn't telling the whole story. And those glimpses that people gave allowed her to see past that. How about you? How have these two things allowed you to see past and into better?
Jim, say that question again.
What is helping you to see past whatever is right in front of you, whatever is difficult, whatever is challenging, whatever is more than you think you can handle, and be able to see into the larger story beyond that?
I think for me, it's to join with people who are facing the same thing. You know, join with other teachers who are scared and struggling and trying to figure it out as well.
Yeah.
And you find strength in each other. When I had breast cancer, Lana invited me to a support group on Saturdays, and just, you know, being around other people who had been in that situation gave me strength as well.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Today, this morning, I had a men's group that meets twice a month. And I was talking about my day, and I was talking about how blessed I was and having appreciation for all the blessings that I have, whether it's my health, my relationship, my family, my living situation, my activities, really help propel me into a place that's easier for me, and wanting to be generous and grateful for what I have and to share what I have. The other thing that came to mind that doesn't answer this question particularly is generosity of spirit. And for me, sitting with someone and really listening is generosity of spirit. When I can be with someone, I let go of my own stuff and I'm with that person, and that person feels me.
Which is one of the best gifts we give. One of the things I like about the stories that are told of Jesus is that very often somebody interrupted. And instead of being like I sometimes am, what the hell are you doing? Jesus stopped and had a generosity of spirit and changed, I think, not just the other person's life, but his own as well. And I like that that's the type of story that gets told in that cycle, because it calls me towards a better sense of stopping my concerns about all this stuff and being here in this moment. Yes.
Well, my daughter is on a medication that's like the medication of last resort. And in order to get her prescriptions filled, because she could pass away in 48 hours if she has no ability to fight infection, she has to have a blood test. And otherwise, the pharmacy can't fill the prescription. And the blood test came back yesterday morning bad, and the last time that happened, they called an ambulance and had her taken to the hospital immediately. and it was a bad draw. Anyway, the good thing that happened today is, and it's a rarity in the public health system, unfortunately, but I was so thankful for it, is I talked to the social worker at the agency, and he was saying that they got the second blood test. It was better, but it wasn't good enough, and they had to have 2 doctors sign off to refill a prescription. And they communicated really well to me, and I didn't have to call them. And it was so, to me, that it's so compassionate to just communicate, you know, and take that time, and it made me feel so much better. And I thanked them, you know, for it. She got her prescription renewed for a week, so we're good right now.
Nice. Thank you so much. And something like that leaves an indelible mark, doesn't it? Because they could have been so many other different things, and yet chose a generosity.
Right, and they have lots of people and in the public health system, you know, that they're dealing with, and they took the time to call me, and I didn't have to chase it.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. And it was very nice.
Jamie.
Jamie, you're muted.
Something's not turned on. Try your volume. You might have to go to your control panels. Maybe your microphone is turned off or turned down somehow. Or look down on the bottom, no? Here's the good news. I know whatever Jamie was going to say was the most wise, incredible, out of this world, stupendous knowledge. And so we're just going to have to remember that she gave that to us this week, and it is going to change our lives. And she might have to remind us next week about what it is that she told us this week. Okay?
Yeah, you look unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Yeah. Here's one of the things I know. I could not have gotten through my life without the compassion and the generosity of those around me. I literally would not be here today if that had not been present, in all kinds of different ways. Somebody this week needs your compassion. Somebody this week will need your generosity. Those 2 pillars, I think, literally are the pillars that make joy approachable. All the other ones help and show us and move us that direction, but these 2 make it visible. So if you want to have joy, work on these 2 things. Okay? Thank you for your time today. Next week is our last week. We are talking about celebration and about goodbyes. And so read those last 2 sections, and we'll get together one more time with each other. Don't forget that when this finishes, we're going to take just a little bit of, maybe 1 week off, and then I start a class on movies. Did I give you the movie list? Didn't I do that?
I didn't see it.
Okay.
I did see the announcement though.
Okay, I will make sure I send you movie lists, because what I want you to do is look through all my movies, all my favorite movies, right? And choose the ones that you want to watch, and then we'll make a schedule. And for the next few months, we'll have some movies that are there and available to us. And then we'll come together. I'll have one class at 10 o'clock on Wednesdays and one on Thursdays at 7, and we will just talk about where God is in those movies and what it says to us about human beings. Okay, Garnet.
It's in the newsletter.
It's in the newsletter as well.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Hey,
Joe?
Jim, can I stay on and talk to Nancy for a second? I have a question for her.
Yes, you
Okay.
can. You can stay on and talk to her as long as you need to.
Okay.
I will
And
be
I
back.
just want to say, I think it's so hard in isolation to find ways to share your compassion. So if everybody shares ideas, I think that's helpful. Because when we are home alone, it's hard to, when we're at church and there's things happening and there's all kinds of ways to get involved, seems easier. So
Yeah.
if anybody has a good idea, share them.
All right, thank you to everyone. I'm going to go mute here. So
Nancy,
you
that's
can
not the
talk.
question.
Oh, okay. So I'll stay on.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I love
Bye,
it.
everybody.
Bye.
Usually Jim hangs up real quick and then I can't talk to anybody. So anyway, we're almost there. It's a personal question. So I
Okay.
called my hair guy today